point out that none of you know what you're doing with your lunch right now. It's all automated. You're not consciously saying, I'm going to send this off to make hair for tomorrow, and I'm going to have a curly hair or whatever it is. You don't. And people talk about artificial, and we point out that if nature permits it, it's natural. If nature doesn't permit it, you can't do it.
Ladies and gentlemen.
They can unite very quickly over hate. That's what's inside, is the disdain, the contempt for people that they've made up are not as valuable as themselves. And those other people, they're just in the way of me really blossoming. You know what I mean? So, it's up to you. What can you do in your life to be louder about not being willing to put up with this? Let's make every move they make as difficult as possible for them. We'll come up with a list. I need your help. I need you guys to post, what you think. Anyway, I'm Unc Noel. This is Bucky World. You can visit or donate at buckyworld.org. You can also get the book at buckybiz.com. And you can understand it's what? What is it? It's a robbery. You don't stand around worrying about a latte at Starbucks when you're being robbed. That's not normal. See you next time.
Complementing man's functioning in evolution.
He called the work that he did at Fortune magazine World Resources Inventory, trying to identify how much of them are available to us and where are they and how do we use them.
War games are games that are played in the Pentagon to figure out what the enemy might do and what we should do, and to go through various scenarios and think about it in advance so that we're not blindsided, so that we're effective in the heat of war. Bucky said, why should we have all our bright minds playing war games? We should have our bright minds playing the world game. What are the needs we have? How can we make sure that we're best using those resources to solve the problems we have?
A very engaging, interactive experience for people to begin to understand the kind of global game rules by which the world is operating.
The world game would be sessions where we sit down, and were sessions where we sit down and think about what are the resources we have aboard Spaceship Earth.
Bucky has called the power lines the bloodstream. So you can't expect the Earth, in the metaphor of a man, to survive if he's not getting the blood in the areas where the majority of his physical force is.
You're a related being on an energy network. That's where the standard of living is.
Out of that research came a strategy.
Do you want to really stay intransigent politically one against the other, or will you integrate? Because if you integrate your networks, you can't really separate politically evermore.
There wasn't one map of the entire power grid of the world. So what you're looking at is the first one.
To have comprehensive, real-time, accurate data visualized in a way that you can understand it and understand the consequences of the implementation of your strategy.
Nothing wrong with technology, simply the short-sightedness with which man is using it.
the limited way he's been looking at it, and he's not to be blamed for it. They've been intellectual slaves. Everybody's been a slave, and all made specialists. Nobody look at the big picture. Man, as he begins to really integrate his information, begins to see these things, that the chemistries are always meant to circulate.
Bucky put out the impress that you could take care of total humanity for the first time, and we had more than enough resources wisely used with design science. But he said we got to have a design science revolution to take care of total humanity, because otherwise you're going to have greedy guys be confiscatory and grabbing resources.
We've doubled the population, so we've 80-folded those being so benefited. And during that same time, we've also doubled their lifespan as a manifest of its being a higher standard of living, that they do not deteriorate. We've mastered this disease and that disease, and we've vastly increased the degrees of freedom.
I think that the principles of responsible investment from the United Nations, which encompass about $60 trillion, I think at this point, of signatory assets under management, meaning companies worth $1 billion, companies worth $2 billion, pension funds that represent, you know, several $100 million, all have teamed up and signed a document to say, we are only going to abide by companies and invest in companies and run companies that have great labor relations, that have environmental sustainability and transparency throughout the supply chain, a whole host of principles. And then we'll include that in our corporate reports. That's a great signifier to me of the importance of the consumer's voice in the bigger ecosystem that we're talking about here when it comes to commercialization. Because companies aren't doing that just to be altruistic. They're seeing a movement amongst consumers and a want amongst consumers and employees to work for companies that are better managed, that have, you know, better pay and, you know, gender equality and all the things that we hope for, and environmental transparency at the same time.
Simple, raw. Oh, baby fell down.
You know about feathers? These are feathers. I usually make a lot more mud than this. I hit the jackpot more. I see another big mama. I want to find another hill. This isn't big enough. Fast. Really fast.
What are you gonna do?
Let's go run down the hill now.
If there's a claim about organic, it needs to be third-party verified. If there's a claim about fair trade or labor practices, it needs to be third-party verified. And there is an infrastructure now to verify that. So I think a company that refuses to do that chooses to do that at their own peril. We brought out the first fair trade tea in 2003. But we weren't able to make our whole line fair trade until 2011. It took 8 years to invest in the supply chain, to develop new partners, to get the gardens to convert and get certified, and get the third-party inspection system set up. But we're now certainly the largest fair trade bottled tea brand out there, and we made that investment. The trends of health and wellness, environmental responsibility, and corporate social responsibility as three different mega trends. And the area where they overlapped back in 2007 was relatively small. But looking out 5 years, 6 years, the area where they overlap all of a sudden it's all on top of each other. And that, they said, was a standard for doing business. That if we really want to invest in the future, we need to invest in this model of business. And it's going to be important not just for a group of consumers, but we hope that it's going to start to permeate the rest of our approach to business.
He's looking at systems thinking. He's looking at bigger pictures and design and how we can design a culture and society that works.
The hoopla of Earth Day is over. The problems remain. But America must undertake a revolution in its way of life. Affluent America will, we were told, almost certainly have to scale down its standards of living, as many conveniences, as much conspicuous consumption.
You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care.
I can't help that. All I know is I got my orders. They told me to tell you to get off, and that's what I'm telling you.
You mean get off my own land?
Now, don't go to blaming me. It ain't my fault.
Whose fault is it?
You know who owns the land, the Shawnee Land and Cattle Company.
And who's the Shawnee Land and Cattle Company?
It ain't nobody. It's a company.
They got a president, ain't they? They got somebody who knows what a shotgun's for, ain't they?
Oh, son, it ain't his fault because the bank tells him what to do.
All right. Where's the bank?
Tulsa. What's the use of picking on him? He ain't nothing but the manager. And he's half crazy himself trying to keep up with his orders from the east.
Then who do we shoot?
Brother, I don't know. If I did, I'd tell you. I just don't know who's to blame.
I'm right here to tell you, mister, there ain't nobody gonna push me off my land. My grandpa took up this land 70 years ago. My pa was born here. We was all born on it. And some of us was killed on it.
The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you.
I think of the movie Giant Robot, and I think of these buildings and cities as almost like with arms and interlocked and spanning the globe, if you will, almost encompassing the diameter of the earth. And one of the things Bucky defines the grunge as is the byproduct of all those, that linkage around the world, and that's the grunge.
They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls.
It's a steamroller being driven by a blind person, if you will, that doesn't see where he or she's going, and it just kind of runs over everything without even knowing. It's almost like, I'll avoid the speed bumps and I don't care. And it's just going to keep going, and whatever it's in its path is in its path.
They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
Is it just and we talk about the indivisible hand on the economy. Is this the indivisible pair of hands that's choking you slowly? And why have you allowed that to happen over the course of your lifetime? And are you aware of it now? And if you are, what are you going to do about it to change it?
They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right.
In some ways, you could define the grunge as the man. When people talk about who's been holding you back, the grunge is the man. The grunge has been holding you back. Now, is that your fault?
You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place.
You look at the challenges you face in life, and very often are these challenges things that you could address, and very often almost moving out of the way of this steamroller that's coming at you with a blind driver can solve half of your problems.
because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
And sometimes we choose to stay in the path of these things coming at us. And what we're saying is just say no to that and move on to something even better.
I want you to realize that these are the kind of things become very powerfully visible with World Game.
An important point about World Game was the role of data and the visualization of accurate data about the global system.
An important message, and it's an important message we need to keep sending today, which is we've got to think comprehensively, we've got to think anticipatorily, and we should always be thinking at the largest possible scale.
The rate at which people are being hooked up to the global system is going much, much faster than this population explosion. I mean, maybe 4 times faster.
He predicted it. He predicted it in education automation. I think he wrote back in the early 70s. And look at where we're going now. 50 years later, we're going beyond that point. And so that is very much, to me, an extension of World Game.
It is a design revolution, and it's manifesting itself in new science, in new technology flowing from that science, new models for organizing businesses, and sort of spontaneous new models for social organization.
So more and more people are recognizing that making the shift from mere competition to collaboration, from ambition to inspiration, that's the name of the game.
And I think that if we were to look towards the notion of transformation, it would take us beyond the concepts of advocacy or activism. What happens with transformation is that we go beyond the previous forms, where what is in front of us when there's transformation can't even be recognized for what it used to be before.
Nature wasn't designed for humans to have to choose between a healthy environment and a healthy economy.
But real transformation is going to mean that we have to let go of a lot of what we have been in order to step in to what we're called to be.
He admonished people to do their own thinking, to try to understand what he understood about the nature of reality, the nature of being human, the nature of our agency as designers.
They had discovered it was highly feasible. Every one of them suddenly found highly feasible to make our world work. Absolutely sense. It wasn't something for a thin chance, it was easy. But you can't do it with those sovereign boundaries, for instance.
We would pick a series of problems, and they would work in groups to try and develop strategies for solving those problems.
He saw that this was possible because he understood where technology was heading, where computers were heading, what that awesome power could do.
Pain pushes until vision pulls. And a lot of the advocacy and the activism that I see going on is born out of a place of pain. People just want a change. They want it to be different. But not all change results in transformation.
We realize at some level, or many, many people do, that we have to leave behind an entire era of worldview and enter into another one. And once again, it's not like this has never happened before, but it's time for a new one. You and I can say, no, I don't want to. When we do not follow, then that means we're not taking our part in the larger architectural pattern by which humanity becomes all that it can be, and life on Earth becomes all that it can be.
And most of us are playing a pretty small, this is what Bucky proved, that one individual can affect the entire planet.
And so I think there is a way in which the so-called higher consciousness movement has infantilized itself, has not acted like grown-ups. The point is that when we do not, when any of us decides not to do that, that is a move in a cancerous direction, which is a destructive direction. And you know that we used to say in the 60s, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. We have lived, particularly in Western civilization, with this illusion of neutrality.
I can think of no better place for this center of diplomacy than here in orbit around the neutral planet. What are your thoughts on this momentous occasion, your neutralness?
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
Well, you begin to understand that if you're not contributing to the system, you're sucking from the system. With every thought we think and with every action, you're either supporting the change that's necessary or you are supporting a an increasingly devolutionary status quo.
There is enough to go around. It's just a matter of transportation and distribution and just education in general of people. It would bring about a change in attitude about human beings on Earth and being the stewards of spaceship Earth.
Men talk about peace, lovely. There's no such thing. It never has been so far. There could be peace. But what's been called peace in the past has always been the conditions to satisfy the last conqueror.
History is written by the victor. Because all you need to change the world is one good lie and a river of blood.
Are we going to be able to overcome our conditioned reflexes? Are we going to be able to talk with our fellow man in a reasonable manner?
Bucky said politicians and government is all obsolete. In a day when I can vote on who's going to win American Idol or whatever the show is at the moment, why can't I vote if we're going to build another bomber or we're going to have better schools?
We've gone from less than 1% of humanity to over 40% of humanity, enjoying a higher standard of living than was dreamt, known, experienced, or dreamt of by any king when I was a boy.
I am poor because I am a river to my people.
But part of what we're all involved with is this smaller world game, is how you spin out knowledge and understanding and a better sense of stewardship of the planet through these types of exercises.
I think everybody is playing world game. It's just a question of how conscious we are about it. You can either be asleep and be unconscious of the fact that the choices that you make of your products will impact the earth. You can be unconscious about it and believe that it's all about you and your family and that your choices don't impact anybody else. You can be unconscious, just like you can be unconscious about the laws of gravity, but it doesn't mean you're not using it.
Bureaucracies do not think. They operate entirely on the dogma of their party, whatever it may be. That if one side makes one altruistic move, that side has to lose. You didn't know that before World War II, but now we know that is so. This means then, that's when there are international exchanges between the politicians. Read that they seemingly go way out of their way to be extra rude to simply be sure that anybody thinks there's any altruism in there. In order to be able to integrate, you had to integrate the government networks and the private networks. And the private networks said, we just never will integrate. They assumed that, so they put the problem into the computer. Which way will you make the most profit, by integrating or not integrating? The computer said you make 30% greater profit.
And the power game, if you really want to play the power game, that's exactly what the great nations do, because in our specialization, we have been leaving it to somebody else. All of them are operating on the working assumption that there's nowhere nearly enough to go around. That seemed to be the way the picture was yesterday. This is more or less the way the name World Game got started, and now you have a little idea of what it is about, and I say I have been employing it, and I've now gotten some quite good results.
I'm perfectly confident then that this can be advanced into very extraordinary documentaries, and this great extraordinary documentary, it can get into national broadcasting, and I'm perfectly confident that all around the world, people will feel as these young people feel.
Once you've been investing your own time, begin to play it, you're going to get really quite new feeling about our proprietorship of our spaceship Earth, where man can tune in directly with his senses less than a millionth of reality. So of all the things that are really going on, affecting all of us, our tomorrow, it's all being conducted in areas of reality where man cannot see, touch, smell, or hear.
I would think our function is to then, in every way, make that functioning successful aboard the spaceship Earth. In 1927, I decided to peel off from other activities and really concern myself. That's when I began playing the world game, to make very comprehensive calculations the way I learned to do in playing world navy war games, where you deal in total world resources.
It's happening all over. And I see it as an adaptive, in the same sense that biological systems respond to threat, that it's an adaptive response, that we may not realize that's exactly what we're doing, and all the parts of it may not be aware that that's what they're doing any more than than ants that are cooperating in building an anthill. It seems to be very true. Now, all of that's happening at the same time that all of these very depressing and scary things are going on.
Getting all the variables that go into the logistics and then finally into the ultimate ballistics. How many variables are there when you begin finally you're going to fire from one moving ship, another moving ship in a heaving sea? Every variable of firing from a steerable planet to another steerable planet was in there. Very many more variables than firing from a fixed position on the land to another fixed position on the land. I found really all the variables mathematically of universe were in there. Therefore, I saw that we could generalize this special case of comprehensive anticipatory design science, which is just going to the idea of who could carry the greatest hitting power, the greatest distance, shortest time, greatest accuracy.
More and more people are recognizing that making the shift from fear consciousness to love consciousness, from body identification to spirit identification, from mere competition to collaboration, from ambition to inspiration, that's the name of the game.
The number of scientists today that really know the world could work is something less than 1%. Society doesn't know the world could work. Politicians haven't the slightest idea it could work. They really don't. We as human beings are putting a horrible load on politicians who can't really solve the problems. Their lives are really quite horrible lives. We are blaming them, and it really isn't that. They don't have the capability, so we are at fault in asking them to solve the problems.
The nature of our agency as designers, not just activists or ambassadors of a cause, but as designers of the future.
Then we're going to want to probe deeper and ask deeper questions and be willing to make more radical changes, because it's going to take more than just changing our light bulbs. It's going to change our ways of thinking, our ways of consuming. And you know what? It's not just up to individual consumers to make changes. That's one of the things I love about Buckminster Fuller's life and work, is that he's looking at systems thinking. He's looking at bigger pictures and design and how we can design a culture and society that works. And it's unfair for any of us to feel like we're responsible for doing all the self-righteous and wonderful things in the world, and supporting our families and being good, noble people, and earning a good living in a good green economy in the world that we live in. We want to do the best we can with all those things, but we also recognize that we are part of, we are dependent on, we are interwoven with systems.
We've got to find out something about man for the first time in history. Up to this time, just think of it, no scientist has ever looked at the plumbing. Never been retained by anybody to look at the plumbing. You talk about pollutions and wonder why, and society is saying, blaming scientists for being irresponsible. Society never is asking to look at the plumbing.
Violence is a way that nature perfects itself. It kind of throws these opposite things so it can get the scalpel to make the groovier thing out of, you know. What's so interesting and paradoxical about the whole thing is in the midst of this violence, we have this dream of peace. Where does that come from? That's even more mysterious than violence. But in the midst of all this violence, we have this dream of peace and love and community, and that seems to be kind of the, one of the freshest, most current moves of nature that she's thrown this into now. Well, what do you think about this, guys? Oh, now you've got these two factions working at each other. You know, you've got peace and love and going against selfishness and looking out for your own self-interest, and these two things clashing to what's going to happen? How is that going to work? That's how we roll. We're a violent species. This is how we do it.
My original thought in 1917 was that we might be doing enough more with so much less. You might be able to take care of everybody.
I've been working on ending hunger for over 30 years now. I was first involved with international hunger. The causes of hunger had nothing to do with not having enough food or enough money. We had those. on the planet, and certainly not knowing how countries had ended hunger. What was really in the way of ending hunger was creating the political will.
Their lives are really quite horrible lives.
And of course our politicians, they are representations of us, and so finally it gets down to the will of the individual.
And Bucky made the analogy that Trimtab is an example of how the individual is connected to society and how we affect society.
Now that we've learned the facts, what are you going to do as an individual?
I like to think of myself as a Trimtab, and all of us are Trimtabs. We may seem like we're not up to the task, but we are, man. We're alive.
Are you going to just say, oh, well, that's nice, let somebody else do it? Or, how does that set with you?
We can make a difference. We can turn this ship in the way we want to go, man. Towards love, creating a healthy planet for all of us.
I don't want you to just make a gesture, giving $10 or $100, something to scratch the guilt itch that'll kind of give you some relief.
And I want to tag you all. You're all Trimtabs. Boom!
But really look inside your heart and think, what can you do that you can sustain? Something that kind of fits into your life. It's something natural to you that you can do.
Tag, you're in. Thank you.
That idea of what an individual can do, it's the little things in life that make huge differences, and little adjustments that we can make in our attitudes and our actions can really steer this where we want it to go.
I'm going to introduce 2-3 words concepts that we have words for, that I find are essential to understanding playing the most comprehensive game possible, dealing in total information. Most prominent is the word synergy, S-Y-N-E-R-G-Y, which is a companion to the word energy, E-N-E-R-G-Y. Just a prefix S-Y-N, synchronization, means withness.
You're sort of doing a little bit of their job for them.
Whose job? Oh, well, it's all our jobs. As I said, politicians represent us, so we can't just have the politicians, think of them as some kind of magic, magicians that are going to do it for us. And to realize this and take our actions right away.
It's just perfectly clear that the physical problem of making this world work is nothing. It really is then necessary to do everything we can to educate our fellow man on what the problem is.
We're all in this together. It's not good guys and bad guys.
But the word synergy means behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of any of the parts. I find the word synergy is the only word that means behavior of whole systems unpredicted by any of the parts taken separately. And because it is the only word that means that, ask a general non-university audience, it is less than 1%. It is anything but a popular word. And inasmuch as it is the only word that has the meaning behavior of whole systems unpredicted by behavior of any of the parts, so it means it's perfectly clearly demonstrated that society in general is not thinking in the terms of the concept. The public does not accredit that there are behaviors of whole systems unpredicted by parts.
Your individuality has become such a high for people, and and of course commercials have capitalized on this. They say, you want to be different, here's the thing that'll make you, and they accentuate that, and we follow that, and now everybody's kind of spread out to be an individual, and there's some wonderful things about being an individual, but there's also one thing about joining forces. You know, you look at a cancer cell. Isn't a cancer cell basically saying, yeah, you guys want me to be a lung cell, but no, I want to do this. I want to do my thing, man. Go over here. Oh, yeah, you don't want to do that. Let's do all this, our own thing. And then, you know, but, and that's not very productive, you know. So individuality is great, but to lend your individuality to other trim tabs that are going in the direction that you're going.
I think that people think that it's going to be very expensive to serve.
Oh, it's such a high. One of the things that came up for me was opening my heart. You know. That's a kind of a rare thing in society because we're all looking out to do our own thing. And my fear was that when the population says, "Oh, there's a guy with an open heart. Let's go and see what we can use his open heart for." You know, there'll be too much coming at me. You know.
If we understand how we are dependent on our environment and how we are dependent on each other, the degree to which we understand that is the degree to which we'll act ethically and responsibly towards each other and towards our environment.
So whether we're causing global warming or not, and the fact is most climate scientists believe that we are, but even if we aren't, clearly it's in our best interest to pull back on how much poison we're spewing into the atmosphere. And if there are other technologies that will allow that, we should be moving towards them. And I don't understand why the oil companies, if they led the way, they could maintain their position of power and money, which they want, and at the same time come off as heroes. So I don't understand why. I understand that it's expensive to change technologies, but it seems like a win-win. It seems like a double win because they could, like I said, they could maintain their position of power and be perceived as heroes for leading the way.
In the World Game Statement, there's a presumption that there is, in fact, a way to make the world work where people are not competing for basic needs, where things get better instead of worse. It's how is it possible to take care of everybody, to produce enough wealth to support 8 billion people with the resources that we have. Bucky used to spend a lot of time trying to document progress that humanity has made, and it's come home to me, you know, when I realized that since when I was in high school there were 3.5 billion people, and if you look back at the United Nations data, depending on how you measure this, there's somewhere between 10 and 12% of that 3.5 billion people were at least marginally being supported by modern society, and everyone else was left out. And according to the similar UN numbers, it's more like 55% or more, maybe 60% of the population that's being at least partially, moderately being supported by technology. And we've made enormous progress. A question that I got from Bucky and that has been an trying to answer has been an obsession of mine for a very long time, and that is it possible to is it really possible to take care of 8 billion people or 9 billion people with the resource base that we have? Because if we don't, we are going to either put ourselves out of business by ecological disaster or by running out of resources or just by fighting with each other over the resources that are available. Because all of the 8 billion, 7 billion people alive now and the ones that are about to be alive want access to the fruits of modern scientific society. A set of brilliantly designed educational tools using a giant map of the Earth and teaching children. It was used in schools all over the world. It was used in corporations for globalization training, for interpersonal development training. In the earlier years, Medard and I ran a series of workshops that Bucky was a part of, and it was one of the things that he said during his lifetime. We wanted to educate ourselves as well as other people, and so we would hold these what we called World Game workshops. They were 6-week to 8-week summer programs, and you had students, graduate students from all over the world, undergraduates and adults who came to participate first in a 1-week symposium where we invited all of the great systems thinkers of the time to come and speak. And then we learned from them, and then a smaller number would stay and participate in what we called design science laboratories, where we would pick a series of problems and they would work in groups to try and develop strategies for solving those problems. One other thing I'll say about that early work with World Resources, he was exposed to that at the Navy War College, and he was frustrated, he said, by the fact that the Navy, the military, would bring these brilliant minds, scientists from all over the world, geologists and other scientists there, and they would try and make maps of where the world resources were and understand them, because they knew that that was a cause of war. I mean, and you needed resources to win wars as well. And so every country had these global strategy games that they played in their military war rooms. They were all zero-sum games, so I lose, you know, the sum total of all the winnings was always zero. And he said, well, what would happen if we had a game like a war game, but instead it was a world peace game, and where not just a few of the world scientists came and applied their thinking to how to win a zero-sum game, but if we recognize that the world nature actually is not a zero-sum game, and if we had more and more of humanity's intellectual capacities focused on developing strategies to solve the world's problems. And that was the fundamental, you know, underlying idea of the world game.
Bucky's concept of divine design was meant to include the people too. That I find that quite often when I hear that term being used, particularly in some sort of environmental context, that people seem to only be thinking about the planet or the sort of natural ecosystem of nature. But as human beings, we are ultimately a part of that. And there is a disconnect that I find quite often, where there will be concern about the endangered species, there will be concern about all kinds of creatures and critters, but somehow or another there is not the same level of compassion or concern for human beings. And to me, that's a disconnect, to have so much passion for the planet but not have an equal passion for the people.
Anyone who thinks that these times demand anything less than a radical rethinking of where we are in history and where we're going is in denial about the times in which we live. Martin Luther King talked about incrementalism, and he said if you only take incremental steps, and actually the condition of the planet at this time makes it too late, just even within the time and space continuum, for us to do very well over the next 20 to 50 years if all we're doing is making incremental changes. But he also talked about how incrementalism is dangerous in a way, because if you just make small incremental changes, the status quo will always co-opt those changes. I learned from my father what poverty means. My father, often we would be places and there would be a janitor or somebody doing something, and my father would stop us and he would look at that person and he said, kids, that person's life is very hard. He would not allow us to look away from suffering. When you're only thinking with the left side of the brain, when you're only thinking from the mortal mind, when you're only thinking from the ego, fear-based consciousness that dominates the planet, you see so many options before you, and you're trying to strategize what would be best. You are trying to formulate what you think is the answer, even though you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or around the next bend. When you tune into spiritual guidance, you are tuning into an aspect of the mind which does know what's going to happen tomorrow.
There has to be a pathway. And so I've been interested in what that pathway is. And the pathway absolutely has to do with the connection between disconnecting our present assumptions about the relationship between resources and wealth production. That we measure, the way we measure success is critical. And as one corporate executive once said to me, "You get what you measure." And as long as we're measuring success by how much stuff we make, and therefore how much resources we use, we're not going to do very well, especially as we get closer and closer to the peaks of the various resources that are so critical to us.
It's fluid, and so because it is so fluid, that's what, to me, world game and education automation. So that was that was the precedent of everything that would happening now. That he predicted it. He predicted it in education automation. I think he wrote back in the early 70s, and look at where we're going now. 50 years later, we're going beyond that point, and so that is very much, to me, an extension of world game, in my opinion.
Human beings are here on Spaceship Earth as local information gatherers and problem solvers in support of a continually sustainable universe. So we're here to gather information and solve problems in support of a sustainable universe. Sustainable, and so everything else. So if it's not sustainable, it's not right. We haven't done it right. So if we're throwing it into the landfill, it's an explosion. Gunpowder and fire, it's an explosion. And the synergy of synergies, as Bucky said once in a while, is basically God.
A wave of energy and awakening that continues today in different forms, in different evolution, in different expressions. Different people make it their own in different ways, and I think that's well and good and what he wanted. I think that thinking globally and acting locally was really what he was about.
I think we're starting to see a movement toward that thinking, Bucky's thinking in Europe now, where a car manufacturer, once they build a car, they own it for life. And so, no one can throw it away at the end. They have to send it back. So now we're seeing some of those Bucky ideas.
The executives that work at oil companies, they're human, and they have families, they have children and grandchildren that are also going to have to live on this planet.
One thing I've always wanted to do is to take part in a world game, this intellectual exercise that originally was framed by Buckminster Fuller, about how do you take the actions of individuals and amplify them into a world view. So the big world game isn't a game that everyone's going to play or yet understands how to play. But part of what we're all involved with is this smaller world game, is how you spin out knowledge and understanding and a better sense of stewardship of the planet through these types of exercises. And he didn't keep his ideas to himself, far from it. He would go out and talk about the theories and the ideas. And so we have the same principle. We don't say, we've figured out how to do something, now we're going to put our arms around it and not let anybody else in on the game. We absolutely make a point of publishing work, talking about what we've done, hoping that people will take the ideas and learn from them and use them. We're not really risk takers in many ways, but compared to many other consultancies, people would see us as being risk takers because we do work at the leading edge, if not the bleeding edge, of technology. Very few of our clients want to stand on the bleeding edge, but you can take them gently to the leading edge.
It was and is cheaper to mine a bunch of oil from the earth and burn it up than it is to grow a bunch of stuff and use that for fuel. But long term, what's the impact? What's the price we're paying? What's the terrible price we're paying in the destabilization of our climate, in the wars and violence that come from the trade in oil all over the world, and the fueling of dictatorships? What is the price we're paying for the oil industry and the air pollution, $150 billion a year in costs just from lung problems from air pollution in the United States? What are the costs from acid rain and the cost to our forests? What are the costs to our ecosystems when there's oil spills? I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
It's just a question of how conscious we are.
When I am working on a problem, I never think about beauty. But when I have finished, if the solution is not beautiful, I know it is wrong. R. Buckminster Fuller.
When Bucky was a boy, sailors were trained as comprehensivists. Everyone had to be capable of handling any job on the ship, as voice communication with land was not yet possible. The need for all members of a crew to act quickly in an emergency demanded quick, comprehensive thinking and the flexibility to take over any job without instructions from superior naval powers.
Everybody knows everything about their boat. So when it comes to straight storms, they don't need any politician to tell them what to do. They spontaneously coordinate.
A second lesson was that a sailing vessel in itself was a manageable whole system, and every member of her crew working toward the success of the whole ship. It seemed to Bucky a very desirable way to operate. He began to see that our entire planet is one system, and deliberately set out to understand the interrelatedness of human affairs. He later coined the famous Spaceship Earth to symbolize this approach. Bucky also saw that humanity could not sustain itself wasting and burning up resources at the rate we were going. An exploding population could not be accommodated with our current approach to design. He gathered as many fragments of information about poverty and its root causes as were available at the time, and he began looking at pollution, mortality levels, and more. As he connected the dots, he found startling patterns. As he grew up, the world he saw lived with poverty as a permanent presence. When he asked adults about it, he was essentially told God bestowed fortune on his chosen ones, and because of their sin, the rest were left in darkness.
America needs a tidal wave of the old-time religion. America needs to be taken down to God's bathhouse and the hose turned on her. And the time isn't far distant when the wheels of God's judgment are going to go sweeping through this old God-hating world.
He now saw the whole picture, not as a lot cast from a punishing God. He saw past the superstition, and he saw poverty and inequality as issues of design and distribution. He would develop an alternative to superstition. The world was round, no matter how flat anyone said it was. He would work to show the world why. He also instinctively knew this must be the true nature of humankind, the nature man seemed to be working against. He would design his own life as an experiment for what is possible for all human potential, beginning with the universe down to the smallest individual. Intensely interested in design, he was interested in the way that the universe designed itself and thought there must be a coordinate system for this, and made discovering that coordinate system a full-time pursuit. If he actually discovered such principles, he knew in a deeply intuitive way that they would benefit all mankind. This would be a defining factor for how to approach design, architecture, and also to contribute to all humanity.
I must be able to convert the resources of the earth into higher and higher capability of service. I must do more and more with less and less until I reached a point where we could do so much as to be able to service all men in respect to all of their needs. And so in 1927, realizing that there was nobody to tell me to undertake a comprehensive anticipatory design science with respect to the total resource of the earth, I decided to initiate the design and become the prime designer myself.
Nature has absolutely no pollution.
Therefore, the only way we can possibly take care of everybody is through a design revolution, doing more with less. And anybody doesn't want war, you're not going to get it by any sit-downs or any objection, any political actions whatsoever. No, you'll only get that by a design revolution.
Bucky said, find what it is that is needed and wanted, and go do it. I could never tell you what Bucky Fuller meant to me. He really felt some bond and connection with the WinStar that he had felt with no other organization anywhere in the world, and how much time, how much of himself he gave to us in our early years. And the 85th birthday party that we had for him down on the WinStar property, and when I wrote for him and sang What One Man Can Do.
What one man can do is dream. What one man can do is love. What one man can do is change the world and make it young again. Here you see what one man can do.
Dr. Buckminster Fuller, as President of the Royal Institute of British Architects, I have the great pleasure and honor to present to you the Royal Gold Medal for Architecture for 1968.
Bucky had an ability to size up a crowd, what they wanted to hear, what they needed to hear.
In 1964, Bucky was featured on the cover of Time magazine, and it ended up being an iconic artistic image, proof positive that America's geniuses were far ahead. Bucky was a made man. Scores of honorary degrees and books authored. By now, he's exchanged ideas with everybody from John Lennon to John Huston, from Frank Lloyd Wright to Andy Warhol. Bucky had friends, and Bucky was a friend.
He was a good ally. He was leveling the playing field. He was not ignorant of the fact that these women were going to be the first in this particular circle or that particular circle, or that he was going to take some flack for putting them there, or that they might experience some of that. He was willing to do it anyway. He was willing to do it anyway. And that is not being colorblind or gender blind. Quite the contrary. That's an understanding, and a deep understanding, and willing to take the risks of sharing some of the power that he had been entitled as a man.
Her in her chair, looking up, and Bucky's explaining something to her, and you can tell by the expression on her face that she's not buying it.
You know, and the insight was the ability, the power that each one of us has to make a positive difference in the world. And he was dedicated to communication, dedicated to the prospect of engaging people, young and old, to get to work, making this world work.
His wife called him Richard because he would be mobbed after a lecture, and then she would sweep into the room, and she was a New England grande dame with big hair, white hair, and a big upsweep, and she'd come in grandly, take him by the arm and say, "Come, Richard, it's time for us to go home." And nobody dared say anything to her. When she said this was it, it was it.
And I went, wow, that was amazing. I have no idea what he said. And I've heard that from so many people. It changed my life forever. I have no idea what he said. But one of the things that he said that was, I think, the most important, he said, you know, the most important thing about me is I'm an average healthy human being. And I'm no different than you. Now, this was the guy who was the second president of Mensa.
I cannot remember not thinking like he thought. And I don't pretend to be as smart as he was, because I'm not. He could do calculus in his head. Oh, that's so bad. Made me feel like just a stupid ant walking backwards or something.
He started with thinking at least 50 years ahead of his current moment. So we're 50 years later.
People have asked me what it's like to have an in-depth conversation with Buckminster Fuller. And as a child of the 60s, I can tell you that it was unlike any drug I've ever done. I mean, it was truly an altered state. And I know many other people have had the same experience when they sat down and strapped in and, you know, went on a conversation with Buckminster Fuller.
I need personally to frame him as an artist to understand what he's doing and understand how he's doing what he's doing.
Fuller stood with his toes sticking out in the air over the orchestra pit. And he mentioned that within a year or two, we're going to be able to fly coast to coast in 5 hours or less. And the crowd roared with laughter. This was mainly architecture students and professors. He said, "I've got 600 more slides. Would you like to see them?" I understood very well what he was saying. He was undermining all the stuff that I was being taught in high school and grade school. He had acting lessons from Merce Cunningham to learn how to go out on stage. And the way he folded his hands in front of him before he talked, feeling the audience where they were at, that's one of the things I learned from him. Bucky would whip out a big string of car keys and throw them over his shoulder, and they go crash on the floor. Always near a microphone. He never looked at it, but they would even sometimes hit the base of the microphone, clang. And he'd say, nature always knows what to do.
Then went to Alaska Pacific University in Anchorage, and Bucky was to speak. And lo and behold, his audience was a graduating class. Guess what? The graduating class was one person. And Bucky spoke to him, and it was a brilliant talk, and that was a graduation talk, and it was really, I was so touched, because it was this, you could just see this one-on-one with the student. I mean, it was fantastic. He did want to share his knowledge. He shared everything that he had. He was the most kindest gentleman in the more than 50 years that I was with him.
He took the big picture approach, and he shoved it into the mainstream. He shoved it onto the cover of Time magazine.
I think the reason why people were moved by what he said is that there was a simple, clear message at the core of it, which is that each one of us was given a beautiful brain. It's our responsibility to use it, and use it well, to solve problems faced by humanity.
People come to me and go, I had this dream, or I saw him somewhere, he talked to me, I had this idea. Pattern integrity Buckminster Fuller is as active as he ever was.
Our Buckminster Fuller, the philosopher and inventor who created the geodesic dome, died at the age of 87. He was at the bedside of his wife of 66 years in Los Angeles when he suffered a heart attack. Hospital spokesman said that Mrs. Fuller was critically ill, but was not conscious at the time Fuller suffered the attack.
My mother and father died within 36 hours of one another. My father had a massive heart attack at my mother's bedside, but she had been in a coma-like state for a few days. I was on one side of the bed and Daddy was on the other, holding my mother's hand, and he looked at me and he said, "She's squeezing my hand. I know she's squeezing my hand." And he got up and had this massive heart attack. And then, and she never moved from this quiet, as I say, coma-like place. She just faded away. I think Daddy felt that she might be afraid about going by herself, and that he needed to be there first to help her. A pretty amazing transition.
So my name is Seth Itzcan, and I'm here helping to commemorate the life of Buckminster Fuller on Bucky's 100th birthday on July 12th.
I ended up wondering, basically where this writer, where this thinker had been all my life.
I can't tell you exactly what he said, but I know what it left in my life, and I know what it left in my heart. Have a good time! And we need to be the mentors now. I think that's your message to us. Because each one of us now has to stand up because things are so crazy in the world. We can't let our children shoulder the load. Each one of us has got to become like this man here. Like this man here.
Happily stood in line to wait for Bucky's autograph, signature, and had a chance to speak very briefly with Bucky, just to thank him for the connections that he had made, the reason through which he saw things, and it was a real inspiration to be able to meet him in person.
He asked that "Call Me Trimtab" be put on his stone.
Trimtab.
Oh, yeah. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly.
I learned about Trimtab, the concept of trim-tabbing. He described the Trimtab as a small rudder that was attached to the larger rudder of big ocean-going vessels like the Queen Mary or tankers or whatever.
If you imagine this giant rudder on a freighter, and thousands of tons of water are going on both sides of that rudder, and if you try to turn that rudder, you can't resist that tonnage of water in either direction. You can't turn the boat. So a Trimtab is a little wing down there on the bottom of the rudder. And you go ahead and turn it one way so that the weight of the water going past creates lift. And so now it pulls the rudder a little bit out of center. And once you've done that, you can now steer the ship and get the rudder to go the whole way. But without the Trimtab, you never change the course of that ship. It was very fortunate that we have people like Daryl Hannah and Ed Begley who are ecologically aware and understood the value of alcohol fuel and how that could, be a Trimtab that changes our whole relationship to our environment, from fossil fuels to labor to agriculture to everything.
The Trans Am that I drove in Kill Bill, I upgraded it to be a fuel-injected car.
We can do what we're going to do today, which is take any other car and put the very same kind of computer brains in it, because alcohol triples engine life.
I'm ready to join a pit crew at this point.
So this engine will just run and run and run, and will always stay shiny inside with no carbon to wear out the inside of the engine or make your oil black or anything like that. We're still tuning it, but it sounds pretty good.
Any fuel-injected vehicle on the road, and it'll tell it its computer what it's running on, and it can be a flex fuel vehicle.
And everyone is agreeing that this kind of Trimtab thinking, can get past the volumes of propaganda that we have to wade through. So when Daryl Hannah and Ed Begley convert their cars and show you that alcohol works, it's like that little moment is the kind of epiphany that Bucky would, I think, clap us on the back for thinking how to get the most effort out of the smallest change. You can also look at folks like Jay Leno who have wide-ranging interests in alternative fuels, from electric to alcohol, and Jay's even got a couple of alcohol race cars.
It sounds cliche, but you can't know where you're going unless you see where you've been. And sometimes it's interesting to go back and look at ancient technology like the Doble steamer or the Stanley steamer and see how they work, and you realize here's a whole different way of approaching the same problem.
And that's what Bucky was saying, that he was a human Trimtab to get people to vector away from low-mindedness to high-mindedness, to think elevated thoughts of how do we make it work for everybody, because there's more than enough. There's surplus. There's absolutely fundamental abundance in the planet, but we have to have the technology used in the right way, a non-exploitive way, a zero-waste way.
Are we collectively going to use our will and our power to be the Trimtab?
Everything we do and everything we say is either contributing to the field of new possibility on the planet or is withholding resources from that field. So every thought matters and every action matters.
There's always enough, and that's what Bucky said, but technology can make more than enough, and we don't have to exploit anyone, we don't have to hurt anyone, we don't have to have any lack or any shortage. We can have fundamental abundance so we can all eat better, live better.
Nature has a wonderful self-correcting mechanism inside it. An imaginal bud is a dormant cell inside a caterpillar. A caterpillar's going along and says, I eat leaves, and this thing looks like a worm, but and these buds are dormant, and then they start to go off. And it's almost like there's a foreign body in the caterpillar, and the caterpillar starts to resist it, and the more it resists it, the more these imaginal buds start to go off. And these imaginal buds start to tell this being, you know what you really are. You're a little guy who hangs on a branch in this kind of crusty brown thing. No, I eat leaves. No, check it out. And they're going off more. And pretty soon, he's saying, okay, I'll get into the little thing. He gets into the thing, and boom, the buds really start to go off. They completely liquefy the caterpillar. He turns into a butterfly. And you and me, we're imaginal buds, man, and we're going off. And we're going to turn this thing around. And we got to do it kind of quick. Don't you sense an urgency?
It is within our power. It will require, however, that we stop crawling around as caterpillars. It's going to require that we become something, not merely do something. And there's a metamorphosis that we're going to have to go through to evolve into the level of consciousness.
It's a very, very small mechanism that can change the directions of a very, very large vehicle. And that's Bucky was a very small edge, hoping to make some very large changes.
Especially I see something needs to be done, I ought to be the one to make the experiment.
We were all looking out to do our own thing, and my fear was that when the population says, oh, there's a guy with an open heart, let's go and see what we can use his open heart for, there'll be too much coming at me, Too many people coming at you with things they want you to do. And I said, well, that's true. Yeah, but look at it, balance that against the need for an open heart, I said, oh, I'm talking to myself now,
So my wife was willing for me to do it. I show you, brought about all kinds of criticism. Her family, my family, and all our friends thought I was being absolutely, traitorous to my wife and child in not going out there and living. But the amazing thing is that since that time, first place, the flow of ideas became enormous. And since that time, 52 years, I say only the impossible has happened.
Every once in a while, I'd be asked to do something, and I would say, oh, I don't know if I ask myself, can I really do that to you? Oh, that's heavy. But it's not too heavy. All right, I'll do it. Okay. I did it. And man, I got off. I got high. And then I thought, oh, am I going on an ego trip? Is that the way this God or the universe or nature has set this thing up? That when you move in that direction, it feels good.
I've lived in just one miracle after another. And the miracle occurs only at the last minute. You can't count on miracles.
When Bucky spoke about the Trimtab factor, or that there was this sense of where our leverage really is, where we can be effective, how with the limited amount of energy that we have, we can be most effective, have the greatest healing benefit to the whole system. We can so easily get swayed into pleasing other people or meeting other people's expectations or doing the things we think we should do. Our to-do lists get so long that we lose touch with to be, who we are to be, and what we really are here to do.
You're only going to get out of it the degree to which you're open to receiving it. So in order to really dive deeply into Bucky's ideas, the deeper the individual is able to mine their own humanity, the deeper they're going to be able to go into Bucky's work.
That's your responsibility. That's my responsibility. He was setting a standard for you and me. And in the process, he was doing something that could set us free.
Buckminster Fuller, who was so important during my formative years, when people were saying yes and really understanding the concepts he was spreading, and that we do have the capacity to feed everyone, we do have the capacity for everyone to have shelter. Those ideas became sort of vague and were sort of put down as a kind of soft idealism. To see that in vogue again, and of course with that, Buckminster Fuller in vogue again, so I think it's really an exciting return.
What's happened is that the self, your individuality has become such a high for people, and and of course commercials have capitalized on this. You know, they say, you want to be different, here's the thing that'll make you, and they accentuate that, and we follow that, and now everybody's kind of spread out to be an individual, and there's some wonderful things about being an individual, but there's also one thing about joining forces, you know. You look at a cancer cell. Isn't a cancer cell basically saying, yeah, you guys want me to be a lung cell, but no, I want to do this. I want to do my thing, man. Come over here. Oh, yeah, you don't want to do that. Let's do all this, our own thing. And then, you know, but, and that's not very productive, you know. So individuality is great, but to lend your individuality to other trim tabs that are going in the direction that you're going, that's healthy.
Just has to do with how we access the wiser mind, the mind of responsibility, the mind of integrity.
You don't have to change who you are fundamentally to alter your behavior a little. Like moving towards sustainability is not changing who we are. And building cars that are more fuel efficient and houses that are more energy efficient, that's not changing who we are. That's enabling us to continue to live as who we are.
All of these distractions that you think make you bad, no, that's reality, dearest. That's reality. Keep your eye on it, where the rubber hits the road and where the insight comes exploding.
Each one of us can do our bit, and it'll be good. It'll be great. It'll be more than good enough. Just you don't know in advance what the little nuggets are that are going to move and influence different people. You can only trust your own intuition and judgment to put them forward and know that those seeds will have far-reaching impact.
Consider doing what Bucky suggested that we all do. Look around right where you are, right now, see what needs to be done that's not being attended to, especially if it's something you'd like to do. It might be washing the dishes, it might be taking your kid to a ball game, it might be solving world hunger.
For our planet, for humanity. Or are we going to continue to make decisions that are primarily about benefiting self?
The very things we're trying to avoid and that are problems for us, so this pain, this struggle I had with failure and not being the person that I want people to perceive me as, you know, and just those very things that we try to avoid, that's where the good shit is. That's where the gold is. And the other things, the things that make us comfortable, those are the real traps.
You can participate in sharing your initiatives with the Buckminster Fuller Institute by entering the challenge, by having your work published in our Idea Index, by convening at places like where we are right now, the Bioneers Conference, which is an incredible annual gathering of people who have committed themselves on behalf of humanity to making the world work for 100% of humanity.
We don't inherit the earth, we borrow it from our children.
The number of scientists today that really know the world could work is something less than 1%. Society doesn't know the world could work. Politicians haven't the slightest idea it could work. They really don't. Their lives are really quite horrible lives. And we are blaming them, and it really isn't that. They don't have the capabilities. So we are at fault in asking them to solve the problem.
The mission of Bucky World is to create a collective groundswell and to foster bold voices. Our promise is understanding. Our purpose is to attract and equip green warriors. Our vision is a world that works for 100% of humanity, 100% of the time.
So I really have lived completely, really dangerously. I've learned how to get on. I think you're going to have to ask yourself right now, because you're talking about enormous great design, finding this great integrity of principles. You have to assume in your own personal experience a greater wisdom to be operative in the universe than that of human beings. I said, I'm just overwhelmed by it. The more I really discover these generalized principles and their integrity, their interaccommodation, the great design. But sometimes I found that things are coming right, and were being supported. This one didn't get supported, so you had to learn to turn around very quickly and just bring your boat about and go on the other side. Therefore, you're going to have to dare to really trust. If you're really going to commit yourself to carrying on and not getting somebody to support you and say, give you authority to do it and mark your paper, you really got to have that. So I've had to live with using every bit of sensitivity we're endowed with, cultivate in every kind of way, very deliberately, but above all, really saying, who am I? I know nothing. Really learning how incredibly little we know. And really daring to say, great intellectual integrity, boy, how I trust you. That's it.